Every culture on Earth, regardless of what language they speak or what ethnic background they come from, they're derived from, experience the same types of events. These events were reported by prehistoric people in caves. This is nothing new. It's been going on for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. It's part of our life. It's part of the world we live in. We can bury our heads in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist, or we can do something about it. As a child, I had a lot of paranormal experiences, telepathic, clairvoyant, precognitive, out-of-body, and I thought everyone had these types of experiences. I thought they were very normal, and as I started to grow up a little more, I found out that they may be normal, but most people don't remember them or aren't aware of them, and even if they do, they don't speak of them openly in public because they don't want to be ridiculed and looked down upon as being a little off the wall. But these things were very normal to me, and I thought, well, why aren't my friends and family having these experiences? And they got me in a lot of trouble as I was getting older, because I just was very open about what I perceived. So that's what drew me into it, but I thought, well, why me? Why aren't all these other people around me having these? What's different about me? And so I wrote a letter to UCLA's Dr. Thelma Moss back in 1967, and she never responded. I guess it got lost in the mail, or she forgot thousands of letters. And then I ended up going into, I was in college, and I met a graduate student who worked with Dr. Moss, and Dr. Moss was introduced to me because of my experiences. And the first thing she did was she threw me her keychain and said, what do you feel? What do you pick up? It's called psychometry. You hold an object, you get impressions. And I started rattling off information. People, names, places. I rattled off the name, who's Shelley, a fat blonde woman, she's your best friend. Turned out it was Shelley Winters, was Thelma's best friend. I named her, I think I named her husband, who was deceased, talked about some other things relevant to her, and okay, I'm impressed. That turned into a study she conducted on me in 1969, and it was published in a medical journal. It's called Study of a Psychic, and so clinically it was looked at what I was able to do under controlled conditions, and so you're psychic. I mean, it was tested. No understanding as to how or why it operates. I became a research assistant in the laboratory there at UCLA's Parapsychology Laboratory in the Neuropsychiatric Institute. And we did lab work, but the bulk of my work in the last 36 years, beginning in 1969, has not been in a lab, has been in the field, investigating more than 4,000 cases of hauntings, poltergeists, doppelgangers, things that go bump in the night, things of that nature, and most of the time, nothing happens. You go out there, you interview the people, and you go home. Once in a while, if you're lucky, you're there, it's there, it manifests itself in some way, it displays itself, you're able to observe it and perhaps record something related to those events. A very small percent, let's say less than 5%, we believe to be hauntings. These are localized in space. They seem to stay in a certain place. They could last months, years, decades, centuries, even millennia, and almost all hauntings seem to be precipitated by a violent traumatic death occurring in the space at an earlier time. However, about 95% of my 4,000 cases are not ghosts, hauntings per se. They're poltergeists. The word poltergeist in German means noisy spirit, noisy ghost. Poltergeist, we believe, is a product of psychokinesis, mind over matter, which stems from a young pubescent or adolescent individual or even a young adult. And it wreaks havoc with the physical environment. Objects can be thrown around, banging, scratching on the walls, spontaneous fires, knockings, sounds of footsteps, doors opening and closing. And it always seems to surround a particular individual, and it moves with them as they move. And most of my cases have been like that. I met Cary Gaynor in late 1973, I believe, maybe early 74. He was a volunteer in the parapsychology lab, and we just became friends, and he expressed an interest in this type of research, field research, and we started working together. There aren't a lot of people that really want to pursue this because it's somewhat unnerving and you have to have a lot of patience and a strong stomach sometimes. So we began working together and we went out on a number of cases, and as expected, nothing happened. In August of 1974, Cary Gaynor was with a friend in Hunter's Books in Westwood, and he was walking around, and he and his friend were talking about our research.
There is the appearance of an apparition.
On the next aisle were two women looking for books on the paranormal, and they overheard Cary and his friend discussing our work, and she said, "Oh, by the way, my house is haunted." Rather than discuss it at full length in the midst of the bookstore and have people throw you out, Cary said, "Well, give me your phone number, we'll call you and we'll make an appointment, come out and talk with you about this." And since, of course, there's no charge because this is research. And that's what happened. On August 22nd, 1974, Cary Gaynor and I went out to Culver City on Braddock Street. This house, I should preface it by saying, was a little shack. It was twice condemned by the city. She shouldn't even have been living there. And she was barely making ends meet. We sat down with her and started to talk. And the first thing Doris Bither was her name, said to us is that she'd been repeatedly raped by a ghost. And we just froze. We looked at Cary and I looked at each other. I rolled my eyes back, put my head in my hands, and I thought, oh my God, this woman's psychotic. She needs psychiatric care. And she said, well, there's three of them. Two held me down and one big one attacked me. And I just thought, well, I said to her, look, there's really nothing we can do about this. I'll give you the name of a psychiatrist on staff at the Neuropsychiatric Institute, and you can call him and tell him that we referred you, and you can take it from there. We thought this. So we thanked her for her time. We spent maybe, an hour there, hour and a half, and we just looked at each other back in the car going home, and we thought, this is just incredible. I mean, who could believe such a story? Doris called back about 10 days later. She said that friends, neighbors had witnessed things, and she would like us to come back. We thought, okay, we'll come back, we'll humor her, it's not that far. Went back there, and the house had a very strange odor.
My God, do you smell that?
It smelled like decomposing organic matter, rotting flesh, very sour, nauseating smell, caustic. It was very warm. And remember, this is the middle of August.
Ooh.
The bedroom was ice cold. The rest of the house was normal, which, again, we couldn't account for. There was no air conditioning.
You see? I wasn't lying.
We were in the kitchen talking with her about more of her experiences, alleged experiences, and a lower cupboard door flew open, and a frying pan, a skillet, flew out and took a ballistic arc across the kitchen and landed on the floor. And of course, we checked looking for springs and wires or people, and there weren't any. Doris said that another time the fuse box was torn out of the wall and thrown at her. Some candelabras were thrown at her.
I think it might be worthwhile, after all, for us to set up some of the equipment we've got with us in the car.
After the frying pan incident, the skillet, we took a far more serious look at her environment and her claims.
Wow.
She had 4 children, and the eldest was a teenager.
Do you hear that?
Now, I should say that the rapes stopped once we came into the case. They no longer occurred. But her son, her teenage son, claimed at one point he saw her being attacked by nothing. He'd go to her aid, and he'd be just thrown back. I don't believe he broke his arm as if they portrayed in the film. We spent more time there. We began observing balls of light, what we call corpuscular masses of light. They looked like plasma, which is the fourth state of matter. Greenish yellow, always. And we thought, well, maybe they're coming from the outside of the house. And they were always in the bedroom. And we then sealed the house off from all external lighting. And we still saw them. They were even brighter because there was no light to compare them against. And they were about the size of a human fist, moving rapidly about the room. We had up to 25 people in the room at one time. And these lights were bright enough to see by. They were illuminating us as well as the cameras and the tripods. We're trying to take photographs of these orbs, and most of the time we weren't that successful, but then a few times we were. We caught one in particular that looked like a comet with a tail, We were shooting in a pitch black environment with a deep red filtered strobe because a normal flash would have obliterated these lights. They weren't that bright. The problem was there was no reference point. We didn't have any way of determining where it was coming from or going to. We didn't have a way to determine its speed. So we were out in the dark. We then put up black poster boards all over her bedroom, covering the walls with duct tape. We also put magnetic orientations on the board. So if we did get a picture, we'd be able to know where it was, when it was, and the relative speed something was moving because we knew how much space it took up during its flight. What was extraordinary was one of the shots we took, Doris is cowering on the bed beneath the lights that were flying around her in a mad, fray, and the arc frames her perfectly. And in this particular shot, what's intriguing, if you look carefully at the arc of light, you see that behind it, the walls meet at a 90-degree angle. Yet the arc is not bent in accordance with the walls, which means that this light was not projected. It's in floating in free space. The light, we think, is a time exposure of the balls of light moving because we didn't have a fast enough shutter speed. Another picture, taken the same night, you see two arcs, seemingly at perpendicular angles, taken when Doris was not in frame. And we saw balls of light, but never saw this particular event. So again, these are tracks. The same way if you have a astronomical camera and you don't have a moving platform, it's stationary, you get tracks, you don't get the star. This was extraordinary, and we had these pictures analyzed by the West Coast editor of Popular Photography at the time, a man by the name of Adrian Vance, and he said I've never seen anything like this. He said the lens in a SLR camera, which is what we were using, prohibits this type of image from occurring. He said, did you see this? No. I said, we saw balls of light. They were always lime green, like Jell-O, and they were swimming between all of us in the room, ducking, and at one instance, two of our assistants, these big hulking guys from UCLA, they kind of like passed out and hit the floor. We heard a big thud because they were so traumatized by what they were seeing. Their brain just wouldn't accept it. At one point, Doris is sitting on the bed in the bedroom, and these lights are swimming around her. This may have been a few weeks further into the case. And she's, suddenly, literally next to her, the lights coalesce into the corner. And we saw the upper torso of a very large man form. It was an apparition, literally a large apparition made out of, not bathed in, made out of lime green light. Again, that same color. You could see the head, you could see the neck, the shoulders, the chest, the upper torso, but not anything beneath that. And it was animated. And then it was gone. That particular night, there might have been about 25 to 28 people in the room. And we all saw the same thing at the same time. So it's understandable that, one or two people might hallucinate, but not 25 to 20. And we asked everyone to write things down, and they all basically saw the same thing at the same time, which is, again, extraordinary. Even thinking of it today, it's amazing because this is what you read about, but you very rarely, if ever, get a chance to see. But we were firing off cameras galore, and yet we couldn't get a picture of it. And it makes you wonder, are we seeing it with our eyes? Are we seeing it with our minds? Is something impressing our brains with an image? I guess we'll never know. Most of what we visually observed, we could not photograph. What we photographed, we never saw. So we're still left in this quandary. What is it we were dealing with?
She spoke to it as if it were real, like it were alive, and she knew it.
Isn't it possible she was hallucinating?
How do you photograph a hallucination?
When we talked to Dr. Moss about what we were experiencing, she was a little skeptical, but she realized that we had no reason to lie to her. Why would we lie? What's the point? I mean, we're not out there to make up stories. If you do that, write a novel. We had some people that were skeptical. We weren't claiming we knew what it was. Even today, we don't know what it is. There are theories as to what may have been happening, but it's speculation at best. Kentucky windage.
I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're playing with fire.
A couple days later, we get a call from Doris, close to midnight. We go back out there. All the poster boards we put up on the wall were torn down, as was the duct tape, as was the paint and some of the plaster. She might have done it, but she was a very small, frail woman. She was smaller than me. She could have done it, but I don't think she did because her reaction was one of trauma. She was Absolutely. She said she saw them being torn, part of them being torn. And we, again, suspected maybe she did this to get some attention, because sometimes people do this. And we couldn't prove it one way or the other. We did bring in some very high-speed film to shoot film as opposed to still. It didn't record anything. We did bring in Geiger counters. When the phenomena was peaking, we had no readings whatsoever. When the phenomena was absent, we had normal background radiation, which is very odd. You think it might be the opposite. We brought in a sniffer from Hewlett-Packard to see if we could track down the odor. We couldn't. It either wasn't there anymore, or we couldn't record it. There weren't cold spots, but the cold, again, wouldn't register on any type of thermal sensors that we had at the time. Today, we have much more sophisticated portable instrumentation that might record such events. The case kept evolving, more lights. And then one night, Dr. Moss came out, and when she came out, nothing happened. It was very peaceful. Phenomena started to wane by that point. Doris drank a lot, consumed a lot of beer, and what was particularly intriguing, when she stopped drinking, the phenomena stopped, which may or may not be relevant. I don't know of any correlation that's been established between alcohol consumption and manifestation of psychokinetic disturbances.
We're trying to gather some hard data on the phenomena that's occurring here.
Oh, really? I take it you've already looked under the beds and in the closets.
Yeah, we're leaving no stone unturned.
The initial investigation on Braddock Street lasted approximately 10 weeks, beginning August 22nd. Doris finally got up the ability and the nerve to move and the money to move. They said she moved to Carson, and she moved in there. We didn't initially know where she was. We had to hunt her down with the help of Frank De Felitta, who had now formed a close bond with her. And we went to her new home. We kept a low profile. No one knew about her. They didn't know about the case. We went into her new home. Within weeks after her moving in to her new house, phenomena began. Poltergeist, same activity. But also, the houses flanking her on both sides began experiencing phenomena, like a radiant effect. Poltergeist, cupboards and doors opening, closing, garbage being dumped on the floor, machines going on and off. But they didn't know about her experience, her case. How could they? She wasn't running around telling people. She was still worried she'd be thought to be crazy. So it was still there. We went to her new home. We turned the lights out. I had a recorder next to my legs with a condenser mic. And suddenly we heard a loud crash. A vase from across the room flew right into the middle of everybody, smashed on the floor, and spewed dirt across the floor. But no one did it. I mean, no one could have gotten it without tripping over all of us. And if they threw the vase, they would have hit one of us. We played the audio tape back, and we hear deep breathing. Approach the mic. And with the breathing, we hear a footstep, another footstep, and then drag. Footstep, footstep, drag, like a bad horror movie, like The Mummy. It approaches the condenser mic next to my leg, and it shut off by itself for no reason. The question is, why? What were those sounds produced by? We didn't hear any breathing. We didn't hear any footsteps. No one was moving. Everyone was sitting in this little circle. Towards the end of her stay there, we were sitting in the bedroom. Lights were low, and we put up more duct tape with more boards on the wall. And at one point, one of the tape started being pulled off the wall as if by unseen hands, being pulled off. And we saw this. What? And it happened very quickly, and the board flew off and hit Doris in the head. And then Carrie said, "Do it again." And it did. Another more duct tape was pulled off, and it flew at her. And she just freaked out. She moved to San Bernardino. We didn't follow her there, but Frank De Felitta did. Doors opening, closing, toilet flushing. Similar types of events, but at a lower level. She moved from there to Texas. We, at that point, lost all contact with her. Unbeknownst to Carrie or myself, Frank De Felitta was busy writing a book on our case. Frank's a very gifted writer, producer, director. He's a very gifted personality. And he's called me, "Guess what? I'm writing a book on the case." I go, "You are?" He says, "I'd like you to be part of helping to write the last couple chapters. We get into the dealing with the phenomena and instrumenting it and documenting it." And the result was the novel, The Entity, which I thought was very well. It was wonderful. He said to me, if you had your druthers, if you had all the money in the world and the full cooperation of UCLA, which of course we didn't have, what would you have done in this case? Well, the answer to that is obvious. We would have brought Doris into a controlled environment, into a laboratory, and recreate her home settings, hoping to encourage her, whatever this thing was, to manifest itself so we could document it now, as the book describes, with holographic laser cameras, with thermal imaging, with image intensifiers, with, magnetometers, with electromagnetometers, with all these, incredible technologies that we have at our disposal. That, of course, was impossible at any level. But it worked wonderfully in the way Frank depicted it. And I remember the first time I read his first draft of the book, I was just amazed. It was marvelous. It was so beautifully done. Written as a novel. The characters are fictionalized. My character is named Gene Kraft. Joe Meehan is Carrie Gaynor. And Carlotta Moran is the name of Doris Bither. He brought the psychiatric aspect far more forward than it really was. She may have pursued some, help at that level without our involvement. But to my knowledge, it wasn't as extensive as portrayed in the novel. But it worked. The dynamics between all the different aspects brought the story to life and showed the tremendous anxiety and stress and the terror this woman was facing, which of course she was. And of course, Barbara Hershey did such a superb job of displaying that with her performance.
Is this the first time something like this has ever happened?
No. No, the first time was different. I was raped.
Frank called us and told us that he was trying to sell the rights as a feature.
20th Century Fox presents the story of Carla Moran. The most extraordinary case in the history of psychic research. The Entity.
Sid Fury's take on this was interesting. Some of his photography was very reminiscent of The Twilight Zone, the camera angles and stuff. We were hired as technical advisors. We were using liquid nitrogen in the movie. We didn't use liquid helium. It was much more expensive. In fact, the soundstage got real hot because we were shooting late spring, early summer of '81, and I just said, vent some of the tanks. It's inert. Drop the temperature 25 degrees. Everybody was real happy. And just come back, fill it up. It's only a few bucks. And I thought the sets were beautifully done, and her house and the camera tracking was great. I thought it was well done. Last time I ever heard from Doris Bither was around when the film came out in 1983. She was at a screening at Fox with all of us, and she liked it. I think she felt threatened by all this attention. But at another level, I think she appreciated that we were trying to help her come to grips with what was going on. The main reason people contact us is to get closure on this, to gain an understanding, and to perhaps dispel some of the fear and anxiety associated with these types of events. Because who do you call? What do you do? Who do you talk to about these things? Going back in the literature, hundreds of years or more, there have been anecdotal accounts of people who claim they've been sexually assaulted or abused or seduced by discarnate entities. The terms were incubus and succubus. It's more religious literature, supernatural literature. And we assume this is the result of libidinous fantasies, of not having nothing to do with the paranormal. However, given the nature of this case, and we've had a few others over the years where people talked about things like this, mild seduction and being touched and probed and caressed and fondled, who knows what we're dealing with here?
It takes a long time before you can come up with something reliable. You have to check every possible alternative.
It's very important to be skeptical.
I suggest you start with the traditional world.
In science, Occam's razor, all things being equal, you always go with the simplest explanation. The simplest explanation, many times, is not paranormal. Sometimes it's hoax, sometimes it's fraud, sometimes it's overactive imagination, people seeking attention, people looking for money, or people who are, let's say, couple fries short of a Happy Meal, or they're a little troubled and need professional counseling. You have to make sure that something you have documents objectively, physically, what you're experiencing. Well, our photographs in some respects did that. Plus, there were up to 25 or more people seeing the same thing at the same time. Hallucinations are not collective. So what was the cause of that event? We don't know. This stuff is so hard to pin down. It's so hard to actually observe with your own eyes and to be able to record beyond that point. You could live 10 lifetimes and never run into this. So it's extremely fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time to witness this with a group of people. Because, you know, if it's just you and your friend, it's the fish that got away. There's 3 Mount Everests in my case file. This is one of them. And this would probably be the highest peak. I don't know what these things are. After 36 years, I have no idea what we're dealing with. It's not simple. It's very complex, and we can't draw the line between humanly generated phenomena coming out of the brains of living people and something that may indicate that something survives physical death. I feel that somewhere in the distant future, when we have some more sophisticated tools at our disposal, science and religion will probably merge, because science will end up proving some aspects of our world that are called spiritual today. Once you get through all the garbage and all the crap and all the BS and all the misinformation and disinformation and the zealots, the religious zealots out there who think everything's demonic, there's a core phenomena that's quite extraordinary and remarkable. And if looked at with an objective eye, you can't totally dismiss it.